Everybody, I'm Christopher Bosso, Professor of Public Policy and Associate Dean of the Public Policy School here at Northeastern University. I'd like to welcome all of you to I think this is the sixth in our series on government and the marketplace held during the current academic year. And for those of you for whom this is the first time, which it looks like from the audience is most of you, let me give you a little background on the series. Nani Burns, Senior University Fellow, and I, about a year ago, we're thinking of, given all of the changes and all the events of the last several years, the markets, change, collapse of some markets, collapse of some companies, the whole issue of mortgage, the mortgage markets, and financial markets, et cetera, that we thought it was an appropriate time to have a conversation on campus about what is it we expect from government. What is the role of government in the marketplace? And oftentimes when you raise that kind of a question, it often gets to be an arid, rather ideological discussion that goes something like this. On one end, you have the market shall operate according to its own rhythms. It's a free market, therefore government should not involve itself in markets. On the other end is there's no such thing as a free market. Government should be heavily involved in markets. It always has been, always will be. And so we thought that we didn't want to get into the arid ideological discussion. What we wanted to do was focus it on real cases. And we decided to focus the series this year on real cases involving the government of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Because it strikes us that the role of government in the marketplace is most obvious at the state level, where states have historically involved themselves in a whole range of activities that, in fact, can be regarded as involving themselves in various kinds of markets. And certainly at the federal level, we're talking about government's role in the marketplace and coining money, regulating interstate commerce, those kinds of things. But struck us that the real rubber meets the road really at the state level. So we set up a series of case areas where we would use those cases to really shed light on the role of government in fostering certain goals. So we began the semester last fall in the role of government in fostering economic opportunity. And we used the case of the Massachusetts film industry, the tax credit. And we had a nice lively debate about whether the tax credit was an appropriate vehicle for economic development. Not whether it was legitimate, but really whether it was appropriate or, in fact, useful, whether it worked. And it was a really good discussion between Dan O'Connell, formerly the former Secretary of the Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, and Peter Enrich of our law school faculty about the utility, the efficacy of the tax credit, and other kinds of mechanisms states use or could use to foster economic opportunity. We then went to creating access to services and used as the case example the case of the Massachusetts Healthcare Connector. Again, another real interesting example. We had John Kingsdale, the founding executive director of the Massachusetts Healthcare Connector, who really gave a good explanation as to why states setting up a health care system like that to help people get insurance was actually a valid role for government. Then we had Jim Sturgios of the Pioneer Institute offering a sort of not a sort of a free market argument necessarily, but certainly one that had a more modest role for government in providing information and helping people find alternatives. And it was moderated by our own Michael Dukakis, so it was a lively exchange, a lot of fun. Finally, in the fall, we had ensuring equal access. We used the example of broadband. That is the role of the state in ensuring broadband access, especially in Western Massachusetts. And we had Paul Vasington from
Verizon.
From Verizon, that's right. And I have my old notes. I forgot who's it from. Stan McGee from the Broadband Institute. Right, Broadband Institute. And that was a really lively exchange on the role of government in fostering, again, equitable access to services, that last mile, where the market may not or be willing or unable to provide access to everybody in an equitable sense. What role will government play in doing that? And then the spring semester, we began with conserving resources for the future as our theme. And we used the example of Massachusetts fisheries, government's role in managing fisheries. And we had Brian Rothschild from University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, who's a real expert on fisheries and the role of government in managing fisheries in sort of the classic sense of using technology or using quotas. And Tunia Gardi, who's the executive director for forest trends and thinking more broadly about fisheries in sort of a more ecological sense. And again, the debate really was about how narrowly or how broadly government's role should be in intervening in an area of managing the commons, and a resource pool that, if left to every private individual's own devices, the collective result would be collapse of that common resource. And then in February, we did managing risk, and we did the example of the toxic substances in Massachusetts, and we had Robert Rio from the Associated Industries of Massachusetts, on one hand, talking about, again, how do we balance economic development and the protecting state industries. And we had Joel Tickner from the Center for Sustainable Production at UMass Lowell, taking a more expansive view, perhaps, of the role of government in protecting citizens from risks. And it was a good lively discussion, and it really showed us it wasn't some arid debate over no government or all government, but really the sort of fine question of how states try to manage the tough questions in a competitive marketplace where you don't want to leave your own industries at a competitive disadvantage with other states or other nations, and yet you want to protect your citizens' health and welfare. Which brings us to today, and I'll introduce our moderator in a minute, but let me just give you a highlight of upcoming attractions. The last seminar of the series, next April 26th, here at this room at this time, will be ensuring the ongoing legitimacy of the democratic institutions, and the case will be the case for public education. And we're setting it up as, what is the role of public education? Is it there to train citizens or train people for the workplace? I mean, we're setting up perhaps an artificial distinction, but yet within that artificial sort of dichotomy, if you will, is a real interesting question. What are public schools for? Are they to create citizens or workers? Is that, and that's an enduring debate in some respects. And so we are going to have for that one right now Mira Livingston, who's an assistant professor and co-convener of the Civic and Moral Education Initiative at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, whose work focuses on the civics education area. And then another guest to be named later. We're actually discussing with a couple people about we're going to take a more of a workforce development perspective. And it will be moderated by John Ports, professor of political science and education here at Northeastern University. So a month from now, right here, April 26th, should be a lot of fun. So finally, I'd like to hand this over to my colleague, Nani Burns, who needs no introduction, but I'm going to do so anyway. Nani is a senior university fellow here at Northeastern University, where we work together on issues of regulation and the role of government, again, in the marketplace and on various projects we're working on. And which is situated in the School of Public Policy Urban Affairs and affiliated with the Law and Public Policy program, which is also in the school. Prior to coming to Northeastern, Nani, of course, everybody knows, was Commissioner of Insurance, where, as most of us know, she led the deregulation of the auto insurance industry. For 2.5 years. And prior to that, she was a justice of the Superior Court for more than a decade. And while on the bench, she served as chair of both the Gender Equality Advisory Board and the Jury Management Advisory Board. And prior to that, she had a career with Hill and Barlow. And in addition to private practice, she served as commissioner of the State Ethics Commission, a fellow of the Boston Bar Foundation, the vice chair of the Boston Bar Association, and the board of directors of Massachusetts Law Reform Institute, and on and on and on. And basically, Nani does not rest. And so it's been my pleasure to have Nani as a colleague here at Northeastern for the last 2 years, and I'd like to give it over to her to act as moderator for this event. Nani?